distinction is the internet in and of itself is a neutral but very valuable and helpful device. You can get information you can't get any other way. So it serves a very constructive purpose. But the way we use that tool is where we're in trouble. So I think you've identified that people who have problems going into the internet will use the internet to facilitate or exaggerate those problems for themselves.
That's very true. It's,
Okay.
and I was thinking about, for example, the last show I did was on traumatic brain injury, and I couldn't find anything in the library. So I got a friend of mine to pull it up on the computer,
off the web, yeah.
on the internet, and there was like 3,000 articles, and it was just, I guess what I'm thinking about is, if I was, and I am, but I'm thinking if you're particularly bent toward curiosity, I mean, I could imagine you feeling like you needed to read one more, and one more, and one more. And that it would seem to me that after a while you could get pretty socially or even psychically numb, in the sense that, you know, you're only using one part of your head.
And you're detaching from the rest of your reality, yes.
Okay, so this would be the kind of person that really lives in their head, that really values probably information more than feelings, even off the internet, I would guess. Would be the kind of person that's primary way of dealing with people is cognitive. And
you're starting with a population who's computer literate to begin with, and they tend to be more intellectually oriented.
That's true,
okay.
Huh? That's true.
And I read in one of my magazines that there was a study done at the University of Pittsburgh, University of Pennsylvania, I'm sorry, that was reported in last year's American Psychological Association, that they studied about 500, approximately, heavy network users, and 80% of them met the criteria for addiction.
Wow.
And it included both men and women. Okay. And all of the symptomology that you're talking about.
Okay, that's interesting.
Isn't
I'd like
it?
to see that.
That's a very high.
That's very high. Well, and it's also not terribly, terribly surprising.
No.
So in terms of the cyber relationship person, now this is the person who spends a lot of time, I would guess, in the chat rooms. This is the person that you mentioned before, would probably go from room to room and
or
changing
find somebody that they
personalities.
want to exchange information with, and yes.
Okay, okay. So one of the things I would guess would be that part of the fun of it, or the attractiveness, would be the part of a relationship where you really enjoy forming it.
Right.
So, I mean, I could picture that, you know, and there are certainly people you've worked with and I've worked with whose attraction to meeting people at all is the initial stages.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, where you're getting to know each other and you're still on your best behavior and you're flirting, and then this would allow you to not have to pursue it beyond that into like a real relationship, I would guess. I mean,
sure, you could cut it off, or you could get very, very intimate and still be anonymous.
Okay. So it's really a protected form of intimacy, isn't it?
Yes, it's minimum risk.
Yeah, very minimum risk. Well, until your
until you get carried away. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and I was thinking that, you know, one of the key things about this in the chat rooms is the element of projection, and that I know when I've had clients who have begun a relationship like this and then met in person, you know, that the difference between what they were expecting, you know, and sort of the vision we have that we sort of place on people before we meet them, and then the reality who that person is, there can sometimes be a real gap.
Sure. And in my generation, it was pen pals.
Okay.
And this is pen pals brought up to date and with a high-speed technology, so it's happening instantaneously.
Okay.
So the relationship develops very quickly.
Okay.
And therefore, probably in an uncontrolled way. The problem with the net is there are very few restrictions on it.
Huh.
I mean, in regard to developing an addiction.
Okay. So then the only restriction would be how much time you're willing to spend.
Sure.
Right? Okay.
That's it.
Now, it also strikes me, and I've seen couples where there are people who have met other people outside their marriage through interspace. I mean, what I could see could possibly happen would be that if I was in a relationship where my needs weren't being met, particularly where I was being noticed and where somebody felt I was important, it would be really tempting, I would think, to go into one of the chat rooms and play that out there.
Sure. Have somebody who will listen to you. It's free therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is.
And it's worth exactly what you pay for it, generally.
Okay. So are these like real relationships in your experience that people are having?
They believe they are.
Okay.
Okay. I believe them to be superficial because you haven't lived with somebody and seen them in person and know all the implications. We're living with one another's facades.
Okay.
Okay. And it's facades that generally now can only be communicated in words unless you're getting involved in transmitting facts and pictures back and forth.
Okay. Okay, so to the person, it feels like a very real connection.
Absolutely.
Okay,
sure.
but to the person observing, such as yourself, you can
It's
see some
superficial,
important key
sure,
elements
that are missing, right.
Okay, all right.
And probably the elements are missing that this individual doesn't want to deal with in regular life anyway,
Oh, that's interesting. Like what?
like total intimacy,
Okay. Okay.
or dealing with the fact that you have responsibilities in a relationship that you have to live up to. And you
That's
can't
true.
always do it your way. I have a lot of my clients, both male and female, who are still teenagers in their 40s and 50s.
Okay. And so part of being able to play out a relationship this way is nobody tells me no.
That's right.
I can say whatever I want, do whatever I want.
I'm writing my own script. I'm starring in the production.
Okay.
Okay.
It's kind of like the Walter Mitty thing, you know. You sort of got this whole
yeah.
other universe you're doing.
Except interacting with somebody else, and
Yeah.
not just in fantasy.
Huh.
So that's one of the reasons the net is so seductive and can just pull you into doing these things.
Okay. Huh. Well, you know, one of the other ways people get pulled in is our third one, the cyber sex addicts, and these are people that, you know, will enter particularly the sexual chat rooms.
Right?
And again, be very sexually detailed and
Right.
perhaps reveal all sorts of sexual statements to
Express fantasies that they wouldn't express any other way. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And how often would you guess do people translate that sort of cyber-sexual connection to that they're actually sexual addicts? I mean, would you have any idea or a guess about that?
I have no idea. It's a form of pornography, if you will, which is also available on the net.
Okay,
And I don't know that the use of pornography makes you an addict.
okay,
Again, it's the information that's available, that's fine. It's what you do with it.
okay.
So somebody who's sexually addicted and involved in sex and getting involved in relationships and wanting their ego stroked, find a wonderful tool in the internet to do that.
Okay. So maybe one of the risks of this is you could wind up acting out all of your sexuality in this form and not be having actual partners, not be
right.
doing actual
right.
relationships. It sort of gets caught up in this realm over here. That's really all in your head. It's very cognitive.
That's right. And for a lot of addicts, it has been all. Anyway, it's just their fantasy that they play out, but you can play it out in terms that seem even more real when you're on the internet reacting with somebody else.
Okay. Yeah, because, you know, in terms of one of the consequences of somebody who gets caught up in a kind of cyber sex, I've noticed in a relationship, is that the other partner will begin to wonder if their partner's having an affair.
And they are.
Okay.
They're getting sexually oriented needs and emotional needs met outside the relationship. And by my definition, that's an affair and has to be dealt with that way.
That's interesting. So part of the denial would be, well, I'm not seeing
sleeping with anybody else.
I'm not
What's the
sleeping with
problem?
anybody.
Right.
You know, it's safe sex. That sort of thing. Well, it is. I mean,
It is, yeah.
You don't even have to wear gloves. I mean, you know. But at the same time, you know, you're talking about an emotional and energy shift
Yes.
that's going outside the relationship.
Right.
Okay.
So-
Do you think it's possible to fall in love with somebody on the internet? I mean, to
It's some people's definitions of love, of course. You'd be fascinated by them. Your hormones will get activated, and you'll get interested, and you'll get excited because you're discovering a new person, and you become infatuated. Now, whether that develops into the form of love that's stable for a long-term relationship, I don't know.
Well, I mean, you read about couples getting married, like one of them's in British Columbia and the other one's in Hawaii, and they're getting married via the internet,
Sure,
and they've
and
got the, I mean,
Mail-order brides have worked on occasion, too.
oh, that's true. I love your memory. It's very true. That's very true. So part of what we need to look at is how we can shift back to using the internet in a healthy way. You know, it is interesting to be able to chat with somebody in Australia. I think that's
Sure it
wonderful.
is.
I mean,
Sure
somebody,
it
you know, say, share interesting thoughts or to learn more about what they think about this or that. I mean, so it's not, again, that, you know, internet is this horrible, you know, evil thing, but I think that we need to look at how we can use this moderately. One of the things that and we'll take a look here at the next graphic about ways we can intervene
Okay.
into the process, says that internet abuse must be confronted. We need to regain our balance. It's important to return to the real world as primary place of activity and relationships. confront any spiritual voids, identify unresolved relationship issues for couples, and identify underlying clinical issues such as depression. So we'll go through this over the next 3 or 4 minutes here, but in terms of confronting it, so like with any other addiction, it sounds like the first step is
you have to name it.
you have to name it. You have
Sure.
to acknowledge that I've crossed a line here where this internet or my use of the internet is harming my life and my
Right, and
relationships
if you
with
can get them
others.
to do the first of the 12 steps, you're on the way. Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's the very first piece. And the next thing is to regain balance, which I know often means that people need to sort of confront any physical deprivation they've been experiencing. They need to stabilize their personal and health care. So part of that regaining balance means they have to start attending to the business of taking care of themselves in their life.
Right.
You know,
Right.
getting enough rest.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Right. And since they're generally operating in a family environment, I consider it a family system problem that needs to be dealt with too.
Okay.
The wife, in a case of a male addict, has to be taught not to be codependent
Right.
and allow her needs to come out and be negotiated. The children are an important part of the issue.
Okay, so expecting them to begin participating back in the life,
Right.
which has to do with this next one, which is returning to the real world as a primary place where your needs get met with other actual human beings. Confronting any spiritual void or emptiness, which I think also connects to the last one, which is any particular or potential clinical problem, because
Right.
I can certainly see self-medicating my depression this way,
Sure.
or my anxiety. If I have chronic problems with anxiety, being able to stay up all night and do this. Do you see that with people once they stop doing it, that maybe they begin to show signs of other issues?
Often, I found in a lot of the work I do that once the addictive behavior is slowed down, it exposes underlying problems as to why that behavior started in the first place. And then if we can address those, we can be in pretty good shape.
Okay, and that could, and we're going to have to close, but that could probably show up as problems in the relationship that haven't been addressed, or it sounds like internal self-image issue and clinical problems. So it's important to get some help, is what it sounds
Get
like.
some help, and once you do, get a good relapse prevention plan
Okay.
working in place. Okay?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in. In upcoming weeks, we'll look at women and money and learning disabilities and addiction. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.